Okay, so we're going to focus on verse 4 today. So again, we have this. The verse 1 is Song of Songs. So there's a woman or a girl writing love songs to her beloved, and we start talking about the kiss. She wants him to kiss him. Not enough that she doesn't just want the fragrance; she wants the kiss. And then last week we discussed how she says the fragrance of your oil is amazing, and therefore all the maidens loved you. We discussed who the maidens are another time. Now she continues, and she says, we'll read the verse simply, and then we'll get to Rashi's interpretation, the traditional rabbis, and then we get to the Kabbalah. So what does the verse say? Draw me, we will run after you. The king brought me to his chambers. We will rejoice and be glad in you. We will recall your love, or mention your love, more fragrant than wine. They have loved you sincerely. Okay, they killed some of this translation. Meishari ma'avucha, they have loved you sincerely. Literally, meishar is like a plain as in flat land. So the flat ones, the straight ones, the flat land loved you. Okay, what's happening here? The easiest thing to figure out is the beginning. Draw me, we will run after you. She's yearning. She's saying, I want my beloved to come and kiss me. And you're so popular that all the maidens love you. Please draw me and come get me and pull me, and we'll run together and we will be together. And the king will bring me to his chambers. We will come to your chambers. Now, again, who is the beloved? Who is the man? It's not 100% clear. According to most interpretations, it's the King Solomon. She's writing it to King Solomon, according to most interpretations. So if that's the case, what she's saying, Mashcheni, draw me, we will run after you. And the king brought me to his chamber. She's asking, Heviani, she's asking that the King Solomon bring her to his chambers. And there we'll recall your love, more fragrant than wine. And Meisharim Havucha, people love you sincerely. Okay, so that's the simple meaning. Right? Because we discussed in the past, there's some, in verse 2, there's some obstacle. There's some obstacle here. And therefore, she wants the kiss. There's no kiss because the guy's not here. The fragrance is here, but he's not here. And that theme is gonna repeat itself throughout this book multiple times. That when he's available, she's not. And when she's available, he's not. When he wants her, he's out to lunch. He's busy. When he comes to her, knocking on the door at night when it's raining, she's not sure she wants to get out of bed because it's too complicated. You have to get dressed. You have to open the door. It's too complicated. By the time she decides to open the door, he's already gone. So this is part of the tension of this book, is that there's two people. They know they love each other. They're not sure about the intensity of the love. They're also not sure how to, they can't get their timing right. That's a significant part of the story here. So here she's saying, pull me after you. We will run. The king should bring me to his chambers. Okay, what are we talking about? So again, like we said, there's basically there's the traditional view, which Rashi says, which talks about in the historic perspective, the relationship with God and the Jewish people. And then you have the Kabbalistic interpretation, which is focused more on the person's own relationship with God. What's interesting about this week is that the Kabbalistic interpretation and the historic interpretation are going to overlap. So that was interesting. In the past, I said there's the historic, there's the Kabbalistic, there's the Kabbalistic and the Hasidic. Here, they all come together. They're talking about the same event, but they discuss it differently, and each one adds a little bit of excitement. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to read the Rashi inside. Rashi speaks at relative length because Rashi here, unlike the other cases, Rashi first explains the simple meaning. In other words, what exactly is happening here? What is the girl saying? And then Rashi says what it alludes to historically. So we'll read Rashi, we'll analyze Rashi, and then we'll see what the Kabbalists add above Rashi. So here we go. Let's see if we can show the Rashi. By the way, pursuant to our previous discussion of how do you apply the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs is romance. It's nice. It talks about the love of God and the Jewish people. However, you will see when we get there, I don't know if we'll get there because we're talking the political perspective, but the Song of Songs becomes one of the most important questions to apply in the 20th century. And that is, what is our relationship to modern Zionism? And I'm opening up a can of worms, so I shouldn't be doing this, but I'll do it anyway. And people quote the verses of this song to show that when God is knocking on your door, and there's a famous essay by Rabbi Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Joseph Bershalt Soloveitchik, who was the dean of Yeshiva University, and in 1914 he wrote a beautiful 1954, he wrote a beautiful essay, a very famous essay on on modern Zionism based on the verses of this song of songs. And the idea is that when God is knocking at your door, open the door. In other words, when history is calling, when opportunity is calling, if you don't seize the moment, you're going to lose the moment. Now, on the other hand, the groups that were anti-Zionist, especially most notably Satmar, they quoted also a verse from the Song of Songs based on the Talmudic interpretation that the verse also says the woman tells her friends, don't push the love. You can't bring about the love prematurely. In other words, you'll see the verse is repeated 3 times. So this is a perfect example to what we were saying before, that this Song of Songs, it's a story that happened. It's a song that somebody wrote 2,400 years ago. And yet, figuring out probably one of the most important questions within the Jewish religious community in the 20th century is how do we deal with secular Zionism? Because on one hand, it's rebuilding Israel. On the other hand, it was pulling a lot of people away from traditional Judaism. For those who know the history, what is the arguments on both sides is the Song of Songs. So that's just interesting how, in some sense, the old ideas are always the same, because while technology advances, etc., human nature really it pretty much stays the same. So I'm just mentioning that it's out of context, but in context, but in continuation to our discussion earlier. Okay, so let me open the Rashi. Hide Rashi, show Rashi. Okay, here we go. Verse 4. Draw me, we will run after you. Okay, so this is the metaphor. The metaphor is, I heard from your messengers a hint that you said to draw me. And I said, we will run after you to be your wife. In other words, what's the issue here? The issue is there's a girl. I don't know where she is, but she's out there. She knows she has a beloved. She knows she loves that person, that guy, but he's not here. But she senses that he also loves her. How? She heard it through the grapevine. The messengers told her that this guy is in love with you. So what does she say to So what does she say? She says to him, I know that the people are telling me that you love me, but I want you to come and pull me, and then I'll run after you, and I'll become your wife. The king brought me to his chambers, and even this very day, I still have joy and happiness that I cleave to you. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. We will recall your love. Even today, in living widowhood, I recall your early love more than any banquet of pleasure and joy. Okay, so what's happening here is like this. Remember, Rashi started this interpretation saying, we're talking about the Jewish people in exile, and they're recalling their love of the past. They're saying, please kiss me now like you kissed me in the past. So if you're reading the historic perspective, we're jumping between the past and the present and future. In other words, future and past together. This is an example. She's saying like this. She's saying the first clause is, in the past, I heard that you love me, and therefore I said to you, come pull me and I'll be your wife. That was the story of our history in the past. But now, later, we became a wife. We're not talking about that. Now there's a certain separation. So now I remember that scenario where I wanted to come together. You brought me to your chamber, and now I recall that, and I say, I'm recalling your love of the past. So let's give Rashi a chance to straighten out what he's going to say, because when he explains the metaphor, things will be a little bit more clear. And then he says, they have loved you sincerely, a strong love, a straightforward love, without crookedness. Because again, the word is sincerely, that's an English translation. The Hebrew word is meshar, straight. What is straight? Straight terrain, right? After he quotes the verse from Isaiah, after Isaiah 40, and the crooked terrain, ha'akov, shall become a plain, and the rugged mountains a valley. What does that mean? That my ancestors and I loved you in those days. This is the simple meaning according to its context. And according to allegorical meaning, and here's what we want to get to. What does Rashi explain this verse to mean? They mentioned before him a loving kindness of their youth, the love of their nuptials. They're following him in the desert, a land of aridness and darkness. And they did not even prepare supplies for themselves, but they believed in him and in his messenger. And they did not say, how will we go into the desert, which is not a land of seed or food, but they followed him and he brought them into the midst of the chambers of the encompassment of his clouds. With this, they are still joyful today and happy in him, despite their afflictions and distress. And they delight in the Torah, and they recall his love more than wine and sincerity, more than wine and the sincerity of their love for him. Okay, what's happening here is like this. Isaiah is someone who talks about this at great length. The words Rashi is quoting is a play on the words of Isaiah. There's a verse in Isaiah that says like this. Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the prophet who foretold and actually witnessed the destruction of the temple. So he's seeing the downfall of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. There's a beautiful verse in Jeremiah, which we say every year on Rosh Hashanah. Beautiful verse, probably one of the most beautiful verses in the Bible, in my opinion. And Jeremiah says like this. Jeremiah, again, is a very difficult time. He's operating in the time of the exile. And he says like this, so did God say, so says God. Even though, despite everything else that Isaiah says, that Jeremiah says in his book, how people betrayed God, etc., and it's like all the metaphors of a wife who commits adultery, says Jeremiah in the name of God, Kol Amar Hashem, so says God, I remember to you the love of our youth, the love of our bridal days, of our nuptials when we were first married, when you followed me in the desert in an unsowed land. What does that mean? It means we were slaves in Egypt. Wasn't a great place to be a slave, but at least you get food and you get water and you get shelter. Fine. Moses comes and says, we're out of here. Follow me into the desert. Okay, you have to be illogical to follow Moses into the desert. And the desert is not a place of civilization. And like Jeremiah says, Be'eretz lo tizruah, it's a land that has not been sowed. There's nothing to grow. You can't plant. So the fact that the Jewish people trusted Moses and ran after Moses is a sign of great love and trust. Maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe naive, but that's what happens when God and the Jewish people are separating. When the times of the destruction of the first temple, Jeremiah is saying, I still remember and I still recall the love of our early days when you followed me into the desert. So Rashi says, what's happening now? What's happening now is that she is now recalling the past, and she is saying, when I heard the messengers told me that you're in love with me, I said, let me run after you, pull me, send me messengers, pull me, and I will run after you. That is exactly what we're referring to. That they're referring to Exodus, where God sends his messengers. Others commentaries say it's Moses and Aaron. And Moses and Aaron pull us out of Egypt, but we ran after God into the desert. And finally, the end of the verse is Heviani Amelech Hadarav, the king brought me to his chambers. Rashi says what that means is God surrounds us in the tent of in the desert in the clouds of glory. If you read the biblical story, when the Jewish people were in the desert, it's very hot. There's no air conditioning. It's not like Rockland County. So God surrounds them with clouds of glory, and that is the chamber. God brought me to his chamber. That is the interpretation according to Rashi. Historic, going back to the period of Sinai. Now, again, any questions, please jump in. Now, the Medrash is a Targum, which the early translation of the Song of Songs into Aramaic, which is basically also a commentary, and the commentary tweaks it a little bit. And what the commentary says, what the translation says is like this. He says it's a very interesting concept, and the Kabbalah follows this reading. There are three clauses here. Draw me, comma, we will run after you, semicolon. So clause 1 is draw me. Clause 2 is we will run after you. The king brought me to his chambers is clause 3. Says the Targum, these three clauses refer to three historic times. Passover, God pulls us out of Egypt. But then we have to, after Passover, we went, like Rashi says, we went through the desert toward God. That 49-day period that we commemorate right now, we're in midst of those 49 days of counting and of spiritual preparation from Egypt to the giving of the Torah, called Sfirat HaOmer, counting of the Omer. That period is when we run after God. And we're going to elaborate upon that. And finally, the king brought me to his chambers is Sinai. Why Sinai? We'll see that that's where we have the unity with God. Through Torah, Torah consummates the marriage between God and the Jewish people. as the sages say, based also on a verse in the Song of Songs, that the day of the marriage between God and the Jewish people is the day. The sages explain that it means the day of the giving of the Torah. So based on that reading, we're going historic, but we're also saying there's three specific times. At Sinai, at Passover, God drew us. We didn't do much. God came down. God performed the miracles. God brought the 10 plagues. We didn't do much. Our part starts after Passover when we had to follow God into the desert. That's we will run after you, right? The first clause is draw me. God should draw us. Clause number 2, we will run after you. And finally, what happened? Where are we running to? We're running to the giving of the Torah on day number 50, when the king brings me to his chamber. That is the sort of historic reading. And like I said, today, unlike the other times, the Kabbalistic reading and the Hasidic reading are not going to go in a total different direction. It's also going to talk about, say, this verse refers to the 3 times of Passover, counting of the Omer and Shavuot. However, by analyzing the details of these verses, it's going to give us tremendous amount of significance and hopefully inspiration. And we'll see if it does that. But so far, if everything is clear, let me know. If something is not clear, please share, because what we're going to say right now is going to be building on what we said up until now. Oh, why did I say it's related to the Parsha? Because, why did I say it's related to the Parsha? Because this week's Parsha, as we mentioned yesterday, discusses the commandment to commemorate Passover, discusses the commandment to count 49 days from Passover to Shavuot, and discusses the holiday of Shavuot. So that cycle of the three periods alluded to in verse number 4 is alluded to in this week's Parsha as well. So everything lines up. Okay, this one more detail that the Kabbalists add about a future point. They have loved you sincerely. In other words, they have loved you in a straightforward manner. The Kabbalists explain that most love, many loves, you have to ask yourself, many loves, if the love is a means to an end, then it's not straightforward love. It's not straightforward. It's not a plane. There's a valley. In other words, there's some crookedness. There's some manipulation. If I love you because of what you give to me, I love you because I love your money, then I don't love you. The love is not straight. I love you because I love anything else. Any external reason for the love is already not meisharim. It's not sincere love in the sense it's not straightforward love. There's a hidden agenda. That's a sort of a hole in the ground would be a sort of a place where you have a hidden agenda. And here our love is not for any external agenda. It's essential. It's because our souls are drawn to each other. So that's just that. Now let's look at the Kabbalah. So the Kabbalah says like this. There's a few things you have to notice here. And when you analyze the verse 4 and analyze it based on Rashi and the Targum, analyze it in the historic context as well. So the first thing you have to ask yourself, so we talk about as follows. Let's start with the grammatical problem. And then we will I don't know. It's a problem. I don't know if I could say it's a problem, but let's point out a grammatical idea. Draw me, not draw us, but draw me. So the woman is in the singular. Okay, draw me. We will run. We is plural. Why is we plural? Presumably because it's the woman, it's the man and the woman will run together. That's why it says we plural. The king brought me to his chambers. Now we run back to the singular because it's talking about third person. The king, third person, brought me to his chambers. I would have the third, if I'm writing this, I would write the third clause in plural as well. We came to his chambers, right? Draw me. We're saying the woman tells the man, you draw me. We will run. We will come to the chambers. Here what's happening is we're going from singular to plural to singular. The king brought me. Me, we. In the middle is we. So what's happening here? So again, the question is not a very big question, but once you see the Hasidic interpretation, you see how everything is precise. So the first thing we have to understand is like this. From the perspective of the Kabbalah, as we know, there's really two me's. There's really two souls. There's the godly soul, there's the animal soul. The animal soul is the soul that's self-oriented, that wants survival, that wants pleasure, that wants comfort, that wants everything that's self-oriented. And the godly soul is the part of self that wants to transcend. And as we speak many times, and this is a premise of the book of the Tanya, etc., that human beings have both these drives, and that's why people don't understand each other. That's why people think that just being self-oriented will bring them joy, and it never does. Why not? For multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is because you're just satisfying part of myself. I'm just satisfying what we would call the animal biological self-oriented soul, and there's a part of me that's always going to feel empty until I allow this part of me that seeks transcendence, we'll call it the godly soul, that wants to transcend, connect to God, connect to something bigger than me. Unless you feed that transcendent soul, a person will ultimately not receive happiness. And again, a lot of the conflict within our life, the internal conflict, is essentially a conflict between the self-oriented and the transcendent, between the animalistic and the godly. Okay, so thinking about that. What happened Passover? Passover is that spiritually speaking, God, according to the Torah, God revealed himself to the Jewish people in Egypt. So there's a spiritual revelation. How do I say this? The animal soul was not affected by the spiritual revelation because the animal soul is still an animal. In other words, if you have a moment of inspiration, a moment of transcendence, that doesn't mean that the animalistic part of yourself has been refined. It just means the animalistic part of yourself is not dominant right now. So Passover, the spiritual revelation of Passover, speaks only to the godly soul, according to the Kabbalah. And that's why we need 49 days between Passover and the receiving of the Torah. Because to receive the Torah, the animal soul also has to come along. So you have to refine the animal soul. You have to help the animal soul realize that even if you're self-oriented, even if you're focused on the self, but try to elevate what is considered pleasure for self. In other words, Torah is not here to tell you don't enjoy life. Of course you should enjoy life. Torah is here to tell you how to have a deeper enjoyment in life. In other words, even from the self-oriented, selfish perspective, living a more refined life will actually, when you develop the skill, becomes more enjoyable. For example is I'm very self-oriented, so I like certain pleasures. But the pleasures I like are very tangible and physical. I like eating cotton candy. Now, you come to me and you say, look, Menachem, cotton candy is wonderful. It's good for you. It's good for the dentist. But if you really want to enjoy yourself, you should actually develop a taste of classical music. I say classical music is the most boring thing I ever had in my life. Yeah, but over time, if you develop a taste, it starts becoming enjoyable. Or you come to me and say, enough with the cotton candy. You should develop a taste for ideas. And ideas can be more enjoyable than physical, tangible pleasure. I say it's impossible. But if I practice, yes, an idea, an emotion, reading a book, reading a novel, even reading an idea, reading a philosophy, that could become enjoyable to me. But what happens is that doesn't mean I'm becoming selfless. That means my animal is becoming refined. Less, the problem is if I'm self-centered and self-oriented, I'm also usually thinking about the instantaneous pleasure. And ultimately, there's a very thin line between the drive for pleasure and the drive for destructive pleasure. So what we try to say is before you can get the Torah, we have to refine the animal soul, elevate it, teach it not to become transcendent. It should still, the animal soul is always going to be focused on self, but it should be more refined. And that is how you prepare for the giving of the Torah. So this helps us understand, and you'll see, again, the big idea we didn't come to yet, but this helps us understand why the first clause is draw me is singular, because the inspiration that comes in Passover, by the way, not just came on Passover 3,300 years ago, but every Passover, as we discussed, that same energy is available. So Passover, I'm inspired. But what part of me is inspired? Does that mean I'm a transformed person? Does that mean after Passover I don't no longer have to deal with negative and destructive instincts and desires? No, it doesn't mean that. Because who was pulled by Passover? Who was motivated by Passover? Yes, my godly soul. That was draw my essence. That's my godly soul. But then we will run. Who's the we? So here the Kabbalah tweaks it. We is not God and the woman, the man and the woman. We is both parts of the woman. We is both parts of me. Both my godly soul and my animal soul will now turn toward God. That's idea number one. Big idea number two. The second clause says run. Narutza, we will run. Running is not walking. And here's where the Kabbalists have a profound idea. They say, you know why it says running? Because the godly soul never runs. Only the animal soul runs. The animal soul is a passionate animal. If you ever see a bull that really wants something, usually the bull is calm and it's eating grass and has no worries. But if it gets angry and get nervous, it starts running. It starts running with more passion than any human being could. And in some sense, the division between godly and animalistic you could also think about it between the heart and the mind. People who are more intellectual usually are less passionate, and the passion of the heart is much more powerful. So, for example, my godly soul wants to study Torah, and my animal soul wants to stop in the coffee shop and have a coffee and chocolates. Okay, now. My animals, they both have a desire. My godly soul's desire is not as powerful as my animal soul's. How do I know? Because I want to study the whole Talmud and I never did. Why? Because I want to. So what if I want to? My godly soul doesn't know how to run. It only knows how to walk. And if you walk, eventually you'll get there, but there's not passion. My animal soul, if it wants chocolate, it's going to turn the whole town over and it's going to get chocolate. Why? Because it doesn't know how to walk. Either it's not interested in something or it wants it completely. And that's the element of running. So the element of running, refining the animal soul, directing the passion of the animal soul toward God is introduced in the second clause in the period we are now in refining the animal soul. Big idea number two, we just said. What's big idea number three? And this is the big idea. The big idea is Narutza, we will run. The passion of the animal soul rubs off on the godly soul. The animal soul teaches the godly soul how to run. So the godly soul teaches the animal soul where to run to. But once the animal soul is on board, it introduces the concept of running, passion. If you want something, you should want it completely and don't let any obstacle get in the way. And you should want so forcefully. And you shouldn't walk anymore. You should run to things. That's a quality of the animalistic self-oriented soul. But that is not a negative quality. In fact, it's a quality that the animal soul has to teach the godly soul. And that's why the second clause says we, because it's the godly soul and the animal soul. That's why it says run, because we're introducing the concept of running, which is a concept we can only get from the animal soul. But actually in the Hebrew, narutza, we will run, is actually in the Hebrew, it's more beautiful. It's all in one word. Narutza is one word. We will run is one word. So in other words, that same passion that the animal soul has now spills over to the godly soul. The godly soul is taught. The godly soul teaches the animal soul how to run. The animal soul teaches the godly soul how to run. And finally, the king has brought me to his chamber is Shavuot. Why there does it say in the singular? Because ultimately the essential bond between God and the Jewish people is with the godly soul. So the intimacy is with the godly soul. The animal soul brings us to the wedding, but the actual intimacy, the actual bond is between God and the godly soul, and that's why it says back again, brought me in the singular, and chadara, this cheder, the door, the room, is a metaphor for the Torah for two reasons. First of all, there's mystical reasons, but there's Kabbalah. The Torah has chesed, kindness, gevura, judgment, and tiferet, compassion. In other words, in the Torah, everything is either it's good, it's not good, or some combination of the two. In other words, it depends. So according to the Kabbalah, the word cheder, the word room, is an acronym of chesed, kindness, din, judgment, rachamim, compassion. So that's why the room is a metaphor for the Torah. Also, it says, it continues, we will rejoice and be glad in you. But here, for the first time, it says bach, in you. Usually in Hebrew, you is just is just a suffix. Acharecha, for example, you just add the cha, it becomes after you. You is just a suffix. Here we have we will rejoice in you, but bach in you is its own word. What is bach according to the Kabbalah? Bach is the numerical value of 22. Bet is 2, and chaf is 20. And what's 22? 22 represents Torah, again, because Torah is comprised of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So again, another indication that we're referring to the Torah. In short, when you talk about the woman calling to God and say, God, draw me, after you we will run. King will bring me to his chambers. If you want to think about it historically, it's God pulling the godly soul, inspiring the godly soul in Egypt, and then the Jewish people running after God into the desert and coming to either be protected in the clouds of glory in the Torah, in the temple, in the desert, or the giving of the Torah, or others say it's a metaphor for the building of the Mishkan, being the building of the tabernacle within the desert. That's if you want to see historical. If you want to see practical and spiritual, you would say every year we each go through this process. There's a moment in the spring around Passover night. There's a moment of spiritual excitement, of spiritual inspiration. That moment affects only part of us. Whether or not that inspiration will transform us or will dissipate, that's not up to God. God can only pull. But whether or not we choose to run after him, that's up to us. And when do we run after him? In the 49 days. So the inspiration God sends. But the question is, are we going to allow it to dissipate, or do we start doing the work of day by day, little by little? That's what counting is. No, you don't transform through big change. You transform through little change, every day a little bit, habits, simple points. But if you do it 49 days, you create a positive habit. So that's the question. Every year, there is an inspiration to the godly soul. Over time, in this period of time, we could get the animal soul on board, and that's we will run. And again, when the animal soul is on board, then the animalistic passion is introduced to the relationship with God, and that passion spills over, and the godly soul, who used to walk to God, all of a sudden learns to run to God. In simple English, when I look at my passions and I see that my passions to negativity are so powerful that they overcome all obstacles, I have to learn how to take that same passion and apply it to the passions of my godly soul. And then we will run, and then we're refined, and then we get to the unity of God, which happens when we study Torah. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a story in short. Thank you. Any questions, comments, please share. I see Vicky has a question. Otherwise, everyone have a wonderful Shabbos, and thank you for joining, especially on this special day of Lag BaOmer. Thank you for joining. This has been a lot of fun for me. Thank you. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you. That was beautiful. All beautiful ideas. I just had a question about animal soul and what are we doing in the period of Omer, counting of Omer? Are we refining, because godly soul also has Sephirot, or we only refine the animalistic?
So that's
Also, when do they merge? Because when we merge with King, it cannot be only God, because that's not the purpose of creation, not only godly soul.
So there's 2 points. Number one is that every day of the sphere of the Omer, there's one sphera. We discussed there's 7 spherot. Each one includes, as you know, each one includes all 7, so you get 49 days. So for example, on week number 1, you take the love of the godly soul, and you use the love of the godly soul to work on the love of the animal soul. So you're using both. You're in touch with both. You're awakening the love of the godly soul, and that love helps you form and influence the love of the animal soul. Same thing with discipline. There's the discipline of the godly soul, the anger, the wrath, all sort of a negative expression within the soul. The godly soul, not a one negative. In other words, that's love is flowing outward. Is the flowing inward, holding back. That ability to hold back, to be disciplined, to channel, anger is the wrong word, but to channel your sense, your criticism, etc. So that is, you're taking the skill of the godly soul and using that skill of the godly soul to inform, to influence the animal soul. So we're working with both, but the purpose is not superficially. In the beginning, the purpose is not for the godly soul. The godly soul is okay. The purpose is to influence the animal soul. The irony is that whenever you give, you get. And when the godly soul tries to influence the animal soul, it gets something. What does it get? The power to run. Because it never knew how to run. You see intellectual people, they're very smart, they know what they want, they can't get anywhere. And then you have people so emotional, they're so powerful. When they want something, there's no stopping them. And we each have that because my mind and my heart, my mind wants certain things, my heart wants certain things. My mind says eat broccoli, my heart says eat chocolates. Okay, there's really no, it's really not fear because my animal has the running. My godly soul is still walking. So before that guy's already, my animal soul's already in the ice cream store, and my godly soul is still walking up the block. You understand? So, but if you figure out how to align the two, then the passion of the godly soul also spills over. To your second point, yes, of course, the purpose is to influence the world and to influence all parts of self. But if you want to talk about where is the essential bond, where do you get the intimacy? The intimacy with God you get is the godly soul reunites with its source, which is that happens through the Torah. Yes, the animal soul is affected, but that cannot be said to be the essential bond.
So when it comes to the Torah study, the godly soul, of course, is the driver, but the animalistic soul will learn to appreciate the ideas as well.
Yes, and it becomes refined, and it fulfills its purpose, and it becomes refined. But you want to talk about where's intimacy, where's unity, where's a place where they become one, like the bond of a man and a woman. That's essential, right? When the Torah describes Adam and Eve, it says, "Man will leave his mother and father, cleave to his wife, and become one flesh." Right? It's not just any relationship; it's really a sense of unity. Where does that unity with two foreign things to become one? You can't say the animal soul becomes one with God. You can say the animal soul is influenced by God, but the godly soul is essentially a part of God, so it could reunite and become one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you, good Shabbos. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Zina. And thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Bob. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.